you have a number of sightings of egg-shaped objects from around 20 years ago, or in the year 2000. Very similar to how people describe the Tic Tac UFO. I mean, roughly, not exactly.
Yeah.
And there's an amazing triangle sighting. Actually, I've had quite a few of those. Can you describe this one of these egg-shaped object sightings that you have in your site?
Yeah, the egg-shaped craft that you allude to, Richard, brings one report to mind immediately, and that's a report from the Rhode Island area, Providence, Rhode Island.
Mm-hmm.
It came to me from a young commercial pilot, airline pilot. I think he was 26 at the time, but he described a very dramatic event. It was the 22nd of June, year 2000, so almost the longest day of the year. And he was flying from Nantucket up to Manchester, New Hampshire, which is in the southeastern corner of New Hampshire. And he had to skirt his way around Boston because of heavy weather in the Boston area. So he diverted his flight out west of Boston, and he was headed northwest in the vicinity of Providence, Rhode Island.
Okay.
Well, as he was flying to the northwest, he glanced up ahead of his aircraft, and on the horizon there was an object, a small object that he initially perceived to be a soaring bird, and his aircraft was at 7,500 feet. So he glanced down into his cockpit for a moment to check something and glanced back to make sure that his aircraft was going to clear this obstruction. When he realized that it was streaking at his aircraft and it was on a collision course with him, he admitted to me that it was the worst fear he'd ever had in a cockpit, because he thought he was on a collision course with something solid. Well, the object streaked by his aircraft. He estimates that it passed within 50 vertical feet of his aircraft underneath his starboard or right wing. And it shook him up for a few seconds, but he got on the radio and called Air Route Traffic Control Center and asked them if they had anything in proximity to his aircraft. And they initially, and I have the audio on this, audio and the radar. Initially, the air traffic controller said, "No, we don't see anything anywhere near you." A few seconds later, that same air traffic controller got back on the radio and said, "Yeah, now we see it, and it has just reversed course and is trailing your aircraft." A very dramatic sighting. And I've talked to this pilot a number of times since that initial conversation, and he's very convincing. He's a professional pilot.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a dramatic event. I have not looked at the radar, because the catch-22 about radar data is you need the hardware to be able to play the diskette to reconstruct the events. And I don't. The one catch-22 that the FAA keeps in its hip pocket is they don't make that equipment available to the likes of me.
I also would bet that a lot of the older equipment just gets revised, so probably the old radar data might almost be impossible to play back. Would that be accurate?
It could be a possibility. I'm not at all familiar with FAA hardware, so it's hard for me to answer in any kind of meaningful way. But it was clear that they were not going to make equipment available for my plane, the diskette, that would allow us to recreate those blips on a radar screen.
You know, it's interesting. My wife Tracy and I met a gentleman who is also a private pilot, very qualified, and very similar kind of a sighting now that I think of it. You described this gentleman saw a dark or black egg-shaped type of object zooming by. Well, this pilot who spoke to us, very soft-spoken, very articulate man, was flying across the Atlantic in a very, I cannot remember exactly, it was a very high-quality private jet from the UK to across the Atlantic to the United States. Mm-hmm. And he was co-pilot, but the pilot went out to use the bathroom, the loo, and so this guy is just flying on his own, and he saw below him at an unbelievable speed a dark disc-shaped object zooming by, low off to the left. Came back, the pilot came back, and he told him, and the pilot essentially said, "Oh, another one." He had seen a lot of these, but the description was not that different. And asking this pilot the speed that he described, he said, "Look, this is beyond anything that he could imagine," and it was like either an egg-shaped or flying saucer-shaped type of object, like similar to what you're describing. So a little more recent, I think, but still quite interesting. These are out there. These objects are out there.
Please hang up and try again.